For this conversation, I sat down with Mike again. You might recognize his sonorous voice from the first podcast. So I had him back, and I figured that since he has a military background and I'm working for a defense contractor, I figured it'd be cool to talk about the general theme of religion and violence, because religion is often cited as the cause for a lot of bad behavior now. So I kind of wanted to talk about that and maybe clear the air on some confusion here. For the first 20 minutes or so, we talked pretty much about the U.S. military and prison system. We talked about just war theory, capital punishment, and human dignity, and the lack thereof, which plays into it all. And that kind of segued us into the larger discussion of religion and violence. And in my mind, there were a couple guiding questions that I really got from listening to the New Atheists and their commentaries and critiques, I guess, of religion. The first was, religious people often cite religion as the reason for their bad behavior. Like, for example, owning slaves, right? You might find a Bible verse to support your decision there. And I think the modern answer to that is to say, well, look, that's not a really Christian idea. Like, they were wrong about the theology. But if that's the case, we still have the problem of people citing that incorrectly, and I want to address that, because I think a lot of the New Atheists really get hung up on that point, and I don't think addressing it by saying, oh, it's just not the right theology. I don't think that really answers some of the deeper questions that are being asked here. And the way we answered that was by saying, well, look, if there's some bad behavior going on, there's some kind of dysfunction or moral confusion or hurt that's going on. And the way I act, that's coming from a certain place. And there's a kernel of truth to where it's coming from. And if the only language on hand that I have to talk about that is religious language, well, that's what I'm going to use. And so in the final analysis, the answer isn't getting rid of religion, as the New Atheist suggests. The answer is pursuing wholeness and truth. And to kind of get there, we talked about a whole range of topics. It was great. We talked about religion and ideological language, and where the language and ideas kind of fit into the larger worldview. We talked about tribalism and our kind of animal instincts. We talked about the relationship between our actions and our ideas. We talked about the human quirk of holding conflicting beliefs and our hypocrisies. And we also talked about, being whole, and the pursuit of holiness, and how that's kind of the answer to these dysfunctions. There was another guiding question here, which was, if our faith is kind of the motherlode of good ideas, then shouldn't it do a better job of stopping bad ideas and bad behaviors? And our answer to that was, it's not a perfect answer, but if you just look at warfare, for example, you could look at the Encyclopedia of Wars and see that religion is not the cause of most wars. It's the cause of less than 10% of wars. And when you also look at, the body counts of the worst genocides in history, religion just doesn't have the body count. Like, theistic religion is just not responsible for the most deaths. So this is a great conversation. There were a couple of glitches. We had a brief foray into the abortion discussion where I used the phrase psychiatrist. I meant to say physician. Also, don't mind the gym shorts. Mike just got out of the gym. He came to my apartment for this podcast, and I was kind of hyped up on caffeine, so we got there. But it was a great conversation, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Thanks for tuning in. Ready to get us warmed up here. I think the past 5 podcasts, I think we're on number 7 now. Mm-hmm. I think the past 5 podcasts were really abstract conversations, and I liked it. But I think if you don't have the scope of the abstract conversation really well defined, it gets really windy and kind of hard to follow. So I think I'm going to try and start zooming in more on more discrete topics. Okay. Something we could really focus on. and I think, I don't know, let's give it a try, because I think you were the first podcast I did.
Yeah, we were the first podcast.
And that was on sexuality. Yeah. And actually that was, I think that was from like a listening experience, that was probably our best one so far.
Yeah, except for me like tapping on the table and the microphone is picking up everything, but I think we've worked through that issue with where the microphone's set up right now. So
there's been some growing pains, but we're getting there.
Should I look at the camera or not look at the camera? I don't know.
No. I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we should just have a conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
So I figured you have a military background, and I'm working for a defense contractor now as an engineer. So, violence and religion is kind of a theme.
It's good.
So I personally haven't reflected too much on this, where I just kind of got a job as an engineer there, and I didn't really think twice about it. But I don't know if you've actually wrestled with this idea of, the military but being a Catholic, and aren't we supposed to love our neighbors and turn the other cheek, right?
I mean, I've definitely thought about it as far as how reconcile my Catholic faith with me being in a profession where I could potentially be called upon to end human life. You could say, really, particularly with my job on a submarine that carries nuclear missiles. That really gets into some very interesting ethical dilemmas that I have actually thought about from a Catholic point of view. I'm definitely, I think it'd be interesting to kind of talk about that a little bit. But we can definitely kind of just take broad overview of my overall view of being in the military and being Catholic. I mean, as we kind of know, knowing something about history, the Catholic Church does have something called just war doctrine, or it teaches something called just war. So the Catholic Church has laid out some sort of ground rules of how to sort of justly wage war. And I don't want to get too much in the details of this, but I think Thomas Aquinas actually is the one who kind of developed that a little bit. But essentially, there has to be a just cause. You have to use just means, so you can't target civilians. If someone surrenders, you got to accept their surrender. You can't subject your prisoners to cruel and unusual torture. One of the things that has to be, in order for war to be just, it has to be between two legitimate authorities. And there actually has to be some reasonable chance that the side you're fighting on, like let's say for instance, the American Revolution, there has to be some chance that the war you're fighting has a outcome of you being victorious or you achieving some sort of political or some sort of end. And typically that should be some sort of just end. And, go ahead.
Well, I mean, my understanding of it, not to interrupt, was it's just kind of an extension of self-defense. Or if someone's going to die, it's like you got to defend yourself.
Right. It's an extension of self-defense. Also, you can apply it to maybe a country defending a smaller country. So the self-defense could be maybe a larger power helping out a smaller power from some unjust military incursion on it. The other thing I was going to say about that is, I can't remember what I was going to say about there's something else I was going to say. Oh, the military actually uses, so when I was in ROTC going through my officer training, we took a class on military ethics, leadership and ethics, and we actually talked about just war doctrine.
Oh, really?
And so we were learning about Thomas Aquinas and his teachings in a secular military class, which I thought was very interesting.
Were they citing Aquinas?
They actually did specifically mention Aquinas.
Oh, really?
In the class.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
They were, and just war doctrine is something that I would say generally the Western world and most civilized nations nowadays actually try to follow some form of just doctrine. It's more or less recognized in the Geneva Convention follows sort of a just war. It's based, I would say, loosely around just war doctrine.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I feel like too, with especially modern warfare, where our capacities are just so ridiculous, even compared to World War II, where, in World War II, you could just, you bomb civilian cities to try and get them to surrender. But now, I feel like our weapons are just so much more destructive that if you tried to bomb like a civilian city, just a city or something, you're just going to get such a huge retaliation.
So
is that
so actually, well, I will say it's true that in World War II, I think World War II was a just war to be fought by the Americans. However, and I think this is true for just about any war you look at historically, there's atrocities that have been committed on either side, even the Americans, for instance.
I just actually read a book about the bombing of Dresden.
That's what I was just thinking. The firebombing of Dresden is a great example. Obviously, you can cite the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, one of the things that America has, or countries will traditionally do to justify these actions is they'll say, oh, well, Dresden, we were bombing Dresden because that is where they were manufacturing, arms or munitions. The Americans selected the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki because there was some overall larger strategic objective associated with those. I don't really know what they were specifically, but actually as technology has gotten more advanced, we're actually able to more precise. I think actually we can fight war even more justly, you could argue, because with more advanced precision guidance technology with weapons, we're able to target. We're better able to target the tactical objectives while minimizing, we'll say, collateral damage. So, for instance, with cruise missiles, we can, I don't know how accurate they are, but you can basically like fly them through a window or something. So, the idea, generally speaking, whenever American forces are using ordnance, we try to minimize the amount of civilian damage and unnecessary damage to infrastructure, and only target the bad guys, so to speak. So,
and I think the incentives are kind of aligned with that too. Where if it's $1 million a shot, if you're shooting a rocket, where you're gonna want to go for the enemy military, industrial sites or enemy weapon systems.
Right.
And you're not gonna. Why would you attack civilians with a $1 million missile?
And part of it goes along with, like, for instance, like the war on terror that we've kind of been fighting for the last 20 years. They'll say like winning the hearts and minds. So for causing unnecessary civilian death, then that's not going to obtain our objectives overseas. But I think it is interesting that, and I know when we were texting earlier about what to talk about for this podcast, you'd mentioned how religion is often conflated with violence. And you talked about Christopher Hitchens, for instance, some of his work. But really, if you think about it, I really see the way America is supposed to fight wars. We form our decisions based off of you could honestly say a Catholic tradition of fighting a just war, and that's carried even today. Like for the most part, whenever we use weapons, we try to minimize civilian damage, minimize civilian casualties, only target the bad guys. So there is some faith tradition that does influence American, the way American, and actually most of the world fights wars nowadays. So I say, generally speaking, because I'm sure there can be instances pointed out in the last 10 years, 20 years, 50 years of maybe something done that is wrong, or some sort of atrocity, or some way that Americans have not been just in our warfighting means. But I think it's safe to say that it's a goal that we aim towards, of minimize, fighting just wars, like fighting wars using just means, and making sure the wars we fight have some sort of just cause to them.
So I think there's maybe 3 different ways this conversation can go. One of them is to kind of do an extended commentary on the current state of affairs and say, oh, that was a good idea, that was a bad idea. I don't really want to go down that road too much. The other one is to talk about religion and violence more generally, and how people think about it. And I think that's kind of important to talk about, because I think people have this sort of misconception that religion is just behind everything wrong with the world. And I kind of want to address that. But first, I think I kind of like where we're going for now, for the moment, which is kind of talking about our experiences and the way we process, violence at a societal level,
right?
And how we think about it.
And
I think the just war was, perfect example. I think you well articulated. I could also think about like prison systems and what do you call it, capital punishment, right? And like, I think, from my understanding, the Catholic teaching on that is it's also an extension of self-defense, where if you have to kill somebody for the safety of society, then do it.
Right. My opinion on capital punishment is that we have the means to keep, if someone is a dangerous criminal, we have the means to keep them away from society. So to me, it just seems wrong to execute someone. And then the other thing is, how many times has the state executed someone that was innocent? And if the answer is one, anything one or greater than one, then we should not be executing people, because it's the thought of an innocent man being executed. To me, that's just such a gross violation of justice that if there's any so basically, if you have someone who's in prison, there may be some evidence that comes out later that exonerates them. Yeah. But when you execute them, there's no way to take that decision back. They are gone, and that decision is final.
Yeah. And you touched on a couple things there. One is just this sensibility that we have of just the dignity and the sort of sacredness of the other, right? And yeah, if you kill an innocent person, that's just like,
right.
It just kind of goes against everything you believe about humanity.
I don't know who said this, but there's some kind of saying where it's like it'd be better to let 100 innocent men go free, or 100 guilty men go free, than to keep one innocent person locked up behind bars.
Right.
That's kind of like I think that's that's a short synopsis of our justice system, or the guiding principle of our justice system as I see it.
What we hope. Yeah.
Right. I mean, for instance, you have to be proven guilty, not
you
don't have to prove your innocence in our justice system. You have to be proven guilty, and if you're not proven guilty, then you're innocent. So
I think maybe Mexico could probably make a case for killing a drug lord on the spot, because if you try to imprison them, you can't trust the prison system, and
right.
Maybe they could make a case for some kind of self-defense.
I could see that. Or let's say we lived in let's say it was like a different time or different technology, where let's just say like the Wild West or something, where you can't, kind of like maybe like similar to your example of Mexico, but you can have someone behind bars, but there's no guarantee that their gang won't bust them out. And then it's like, well, the only way to ensure that this person doesn't keep doing evil things is to execute them, Yeah. I could kind of see an argument for that, but the way we have our society, the way things are right now, I just can't, it just doesn't sit right. It just doesn't sit well with me, to the thought of someone being executed, even if they are a terrible person or done terrible things. So.
Yeah. So let's kind of zoom in on the sensibility, because this seems very Christian to me, where you have this hyper sensitivity to protecting innocent life and not killing the wrong person, right? And this kind of I would think that Christians get this from their biblical Christian values and upbringing, right? Where you exist because my God wants you, So and everyone is called to salvation. Everyone is called to come around to the straight and narrow, right? Everyone's called to this, right? And you shouldn't give up on a soul. And it's just that idea, and I think that's kind of where it kind of comes from for me. Is you just don't give up on a soul.
Yeah, it's
that's
really
kind of where it comes.
It's really against the dignity, the fundamental dignity of a human person. To their right to life. Even if they have denied that right to other people, there is still a chance that they could be rehabilitated, kind of as you're saying, or they could come back around. So yeah, I guess it's just, I don't know. When I think about execution, I try to place myself, just imagining being in an execution chamber, and you have someone who's literally like pressing a lever or injecting someone with a lethal dose of poison, and it's just like, how can you? It just seems wrong. It just seems so wrong for someone to actually be like, okay, well, this is okay. I'm doing the right thing as I inject this poison in this person, or this is the right thing as I pull the lever and electrocute someone to death. And the state is saying this is okay. Like that seems to go again. That just seems wrong to me. But
yeah. And I think this still holds in an extreme case too, where there's a lot of, not to get graphic here, but there's a lot of child rapists running around, and I do know some people, like high school teachers would make an offhand comment, or other friends I would have, like, oh, these people, we need to bring back drawn and quartering, for these kind of criminals. But I still hold the sort of radical idea that you have to hold out for everyone. I mean, you have to get them off the streets. You have to keep people safe. But once we've once we've done that, it's like, then now we have to understand there's something really wrong with these people, and we should hold out that we could one day help them.
Well, I think like with the drawn and quartering thing, one of the other arguments for capital punishment is that it'd be a deterrent, and if people are afraid of the punishment, then they'll be less likely to commit the crime. But actually, I don't know if that's actually been shown to be the case. I can't like think of the exact study, but I think I've heard that this has been that very idea has been looked into scientifically, and I don't think there's any consensus that actually is the case, that capital punishment actually deters people. I mean, really, to me, the thought of going to prison for the rest of my life sounds. I mean, that sounds about as bad as being executed, honestly. But
yeah, I think people are also making the utilitarian case for, we're spending so many resources, like so much money to keep someone alive who did something really heinous.
Right. But I've also heard that it actually costs more money to execute someone because of all the legal expenses associated with that. So that actually, from just the way it is right now, from a monetary standpoint, it's actually cheaper to keep someone in prison for life. But that's actually a lot of people don't know that. It costs more money to execute someone because of all the legal fees associated with it.
Jeez. My mom has a phrase.
Expensive business.
My mom has a phrase. It's oh, what a web we weave.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that really confuses me about the whole, or kind of confound, like, I don't understand. Okay, with the lethal injection, I think the drugs that they buy for that are just super expensive. But
yeah, it's a whole industry though.
Yeah, it's a whole industry, and I think it's
which
like
is wild.
They inject them with like a sedative, and then they inject them with something else, or first it's just saline, and then like a sedative, and then they inject them with potassium chloride, which doesn't make any dang sense to me, because you can literally just give someone an anesthetic, just overdose them on anesthetic, and that kills them. So it's like they're injecting them with potassium chloride, and when I looked into this, potassium chloride, by the way, if you die by injection of potassium chloride and you're conscious, it's an extremely painful way to die, because it's just like burning you from the inside. It's like being injected with salt. It'd be like being injected with some sort of salt that's just like burning you from the inside. So one of the reasons that it's so expensive and they have trouble getting drugs for execution is that drug companies, they'll have like a drug that could be used in a therapeutic way, but they don't want their drug associated with executions, so they won't sell it for that purpose. But in reality, you could just inject someone, like, I don't know why we don't just inject people with heroin until they die, because like if you inject someone with too much heroin, they'll die. So that seems like a pretty easy way to do it. The other thing that really weirds me out about execution chambers is like, if you look at like the tables or like the gurneys, first of all, they like,
I like how much thought you've put into
this.
They
like sterilize, like when they're injecting them, they'll like wipe it with alcohol, because like that's what you do. That's a normal medical procedure. But they're about to die anyway. So why would they try to disinfect it? Why would they care about using a sterile needle or anything like that? Because they're about to die. And then it's weird. The gurneys where they execute people, it's padded, so it's like comfortable. It's like, oh, you're gonna be laying here, so we want you to be comfortable, but it's at the same time, oh, you're about to die. So
yeah,
it's just so weird. I don't know. Executions are just so weird to me.
Yeah, this is not to get down this rabbit hole, but there's some states with like abortion laws where they allow late term abortions, but if the baby is born and he's still alive, then you have to have some kind of psychiatrist on hand to resuscitate them.
Oh yeah.
It's just such a weird law. There's 2 states, I think, last I checked, with that law, and it's just like the wildest thing.
That's weird. Yes.
It's
that is very weird.
But so I think I had a segue in my head, but
this idea that, with it.
Yeah, I forgot what it was. This idea that religion causes violence, because I think something that we have to contend with as religious people, which I don't think is talked about a lot, is that a lot of people who commit violence will. I don't want to throw out a percentage here, but there are a lot of instances of violence where people are citing their religion as a reason.
Right. So
and we have to deal with that. Like, I think a lot of religious people will look at that and say they're not really Christian. They're not really. That's not the correct Muslim theology. They're going to say that's not the right theology, but they're still citing it. So that's still there's something there that we have to contend with, right?
Right. Well, kind of the way I look at it, humans, if it wasn't religion, it'd be something else. Humans, they're always going to find we're going to find reasons to disagree with our neighbor, and then that's going to cause violence. The way I kind of see it historically is, I think a great example that's commonly cited for religion causing violence, for instance, is the Crusades, where you have Christians versus Muslims. But if Europe had been a different religion or not even religious, it would have been something else. It would have been an ideology. I mean, we see that too with, I think honestly a good example of a great debunking of or a challenge to the idea that religion causes violence is what happens when societies decide that religion is actually not important. And I'm sure this could be, challenged or whatever, but like looking at the 20th century, for instance, where you have the great or I won't say great, but like communist Russia, communist China, where no longer, like at that point, religion was no longer an important thing. So communism was the most important thing. And that resulted in a lot of death and a lot of suffering. So if religion is not the most important thing in a person's life, it's going to be something else. And if that's their guiding principle, then let's see how they act. Sorry, we're going to have to pause this. I'm going to have a phone call from work real quick. So
no problem.
Take a look into that. All right. Have a good one. All right, bye. All right.
All set?
Yeah, all set. So
no worries.
Sorry, I'm kind of like bumbling around a little bit here.
That's
Humans are going to kill each other, whether it's over religion or over politics. And I think, before we'll say a certain time period, humans were very, very religious, and so that was the reason for us going to war. But
I mean, in the 20s, there's something about human nature, which is just would cause conflict with other people,
right?
And there's just something built into us that we have to fight, and maybe religion could actually help us with that.
Yeah, and like the 20th century, where you have people abandoning religion, I would say there's been a greater shift away from religion in the 20th century than any of the preceding centuries. That was the bloodiest, most violent century in our entire history, was the 20th century, and that's when humanity was looking into new ideas like communism, Marxism. I mean, I don't want to blame everything on that, but we were looking into sort of
rationalist ideology,
materialism, rationalist ideology, coming up with their own meaning. And it's kind of this chaotic mix, but the result of that is 2 world wars, major global conflict, like hundreds of millions of people dying from whatever ideologies or war. Communist, right. And the wars fought over religion in the past. If it wasn't religion, it would have been something else. So
it sounds like so this is an interesting thing, because if I had to give an argument that religion doesn't cause conflict, I would have phrased it differently. So for you, it's almost ideological, where if people have some kind of ideology and there's some kind of toxic element in there, that's just festering. Maybe someone has some pie in the sky ideology, like maybe they think communism, maybe they have communism gives them a vision of a good society, or maybe the idea of socialism, or I don't know, anarchism. I don't know what kind of ism you are, but maybe you have an ism in your head, and that ism gives you some kind of vision for a good society. And maybe that's a good thing, but maybe something like there's some kind of resentment, some kind of brokenness festering inside of you, where your ideology kind of amplifies that and gives you a reason to take it out on the bad guys. And who's the bad guy? Well, that might be the Jews. It might be whoever the bad guys are in your ideology. But I actually wouldn't make an ideological argument necessarily.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know, because in my mind, like, there's an evolutionary argument why religion wouldn't cause violence. It's monkeys go to war. Like, troops of monkeys will go fight each other.
Right.
And
they do it at. Actually, what's interesting is that, like, chimpanzees are, people sometimes will say, oh, why can't we just live like chimpanzees? Look at how peaceful they are in the jungle. They actually kill each other at a much higher rate than humans do.
Yeah. And to kind of complete the the logic, which is, well, if different species are exhibiting the same behavior, there has to be some kind of common explanation. This is just an evolutionary argument where our common ancestor went to war.
Right. It's in our nature. It's in our nature.
Well, it's in our evolutionary history, which predates religion.
True.
So, which means that our common ancestor that went to war, they're going to war not for religious reasons, and we're still going to war, and we might cite religious reasons.
Yeah.
But the actual reason is, like you said, something about human nature.
Right. Yeah. That's it. That's it. We might go to war, and religion. I think you're right. Religion can be cited as a reason, but that may not actually be the driving cause of it. And really, like when you're talking about religion, I think it's important to actually look. We have a tendency in today's culture to sort of relativize everything. It's like, oh, one religion is as good as the next religion, but I think it's actually important to look at what each particular religion actually teaches and tells its followers to do. And in my view, Christianity is one of the most. If you actually look at the teachings of Jesus, if you are a follower of Jesus, that's one of the most peaceful religions. If you actually follow Jesus' teachings, for instance, the turn the other cheek. So don't, not an eye for an eye, but turn the other cheek. Like that's a very pacifistic way of thinking. And then you have where his followers wanted to usurp the Roman government, but he said, no, my kingdom's not of this world. So the Christianity teaches that worldly power is actually not what's important, but it's your place in the spiritual kingdom to come. So I know like we've said before, like Christianity has been used as an excuse for violence, like with the Crusades, but if you actually follow the teachings of Jesus, a true follower of the teachings of Jesus will not be a violent person. But so yeah, I don't.
Well, but it's interesting you say that, because there's like so many things going on in my head right now, where there have been religious people in the church who would use theology as an excuse to incite violence. Like, and there were cases of this, like during the Crusades, not necessarily by the Pope, but by some of the lords who had small armies. I don't know what the proper names for these are. I remember reading about this sometime last year, but it was some of the guys who were just commanders of some group of people, and those guys would kind of go rogue and just pillage towns on the way, and rape and murder, and do all these crazy things, and they were kind of riling their people up, and this Deus Vult, right? And so they were kind of hyping their guys up, and so
you said about like using like
religious language
to justify what they were doing
and hype up what they're doing. And so it's interesting because ideology seems like a human thing, but it also, if we're talking about monkeys going to war, well, war isn't just a human thing, right?
Right.
And
true.
And non-religious creatures
like
go to war.
You're citing like monkeys.
Yeah, and so
like baboon. I've heard of like baboon troops like going at it, like watching on the Discovery Channel.
Right. Yeah. So on the one hand, it seems like the cause of war is just something about human nature that's just animalistic. It's part of our animal nature to go to war.
Okay.
But part of human nature is having ideologies. And it's interesting how you're talking about ideologies as some of the worst contributors of human destruction. Is there a paradox there where we have an animal side that wants to go to war, but then we have ideology sides which could be really good or really bad amplifiers of those instincts?
So one of like some theories, what I'm kind of thinking of to tie in like theories about how the brain works. So we have the prefrontal cortex, which is our part of our brain that has to do with higher thinking, and then we have our limbic system, which is our base desires like food, hunger, sex. And the limbic part of our brain evolved first, and realistically, or one way to think of it is the prefrontal cortex evolved to better serve the limbic system. So in other words, some of these.
So limbic system was food, hunger, sex.
Yes. So
Wait,
like
food,
base drive. So like our base
food.
animalistic.
You say food. I
Oh,
said
hunger,
food,
thirst, whatever. Hunger, thirst, sex, whatever.
Okay.
You got whatever.
I get
hunger,
the gist.
whatever.
Okay.
Hunger, thirst.
Yeah.
Hunger, thirst. You know, basic instincts. So our prefrontal cortex kind of evolved to serve the limbic system. So in a way, one way to like maybe like one idea would be that our ideologies, we have these highfalutin sort of ideas about why we're doing what we're doing, and that's actually we think we're doing X, Y, or Z for this ideological reason, but in reality, it's for our base animalistic reasons. So the ideology is really just it's being cited as a reason for doing whatever terrible things, but really it's really our limbic system or our like base animalistic instincts that are making all the decisions, and we're just using ideology, like humans will just use ideologies to justify serving their animalistic drives in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think that does kind of get at this balance of we have an animal side that wants to just eat and mate and sleep, and I also think part of the animal side is this sort of tribalism, because tribalism is also
I was actually thinking that's a nice buzzword I was thinking about with the religion is like tribalism.
Yeah, and where if we have some kind of tribalistic animal instinct, or if we're in a community and this community is changing, like let's say there's a huge, like let's say I'm living in I grew up in New Britain, and New Britain was basically a third, it's not quite a third, a third Polish, a third Italian, a third Puerto Rican, right? That's where I grew up. And then I remember there was kind of an influx when I was in high school. I started seeing like a lot of Muslims. And it was like the demographic, could be seen to be changing. And it's like if you're in a town and it's just been doing the same thing for generations, and all of a sudden there's change. There's a lot of cultural change coming, in the United States in general. There's a demographic change in your city. It's like, oh, there's a lot of change going on. I don't know what's going to happen next. I'm uncomfortable. My animal instincts might kick in, and I might get like really tribal about this is us, that's them. We're the good guys or the bad guys. You can kind of let that run away. And then that might take a religious language, or it might take on an ideological language.
Right.
But maybe your animal side is just reacting to a change or reacting to a stranger, and you're using a sort of religious operating system to run the application.
Yeah, well, like the religion basically is kind of like the tribe, like you could say, or kind of what you're saying with like the New People movie, and I'm just picturing like, why do animals go to war with each other, or why do animals fight each other? It's always for competition of resources. So
inmates
competition of like food resources or sexual partners. So that's in a way it's almost like when you see like you have that instance of you live in a community and you see new people coming in, there's a part of your animal brain that perceives that as a threat to you getting resources necessary for your survival. So you band with your tribe of whatever. It could be Polish, it could be ethnic tribe, or it could be religious tribe against the people.
Or geographic tribe, yeah.
Right, but when you distill it down to its bare essence, it's just a tribal conflict. But there's probably more high reasons or more complicated or thought out reasons of why people will have more rationalized or thought out reasons of why they're acting the way they are,
well, I think
which makes sense to them. But like if you boil it down to what it is, it's a tribal conflict.
Well, we're also really good at rationalizing our emotions. We're going to have some kind of gut emotional reaction to a situation, and then that just becomes our reality. Like where my emotional reaction to this situation is just the truth. Even if it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, that's what our brain will. Yeah, our brain will try to interpret, like our emotions. We'll try to build like almost like a story of why we're feeling the way we are, and it may or may not be true.
There's kind of two thoughts on this. People talk about I think people are still going to insist on the ideology part and the idea that religious texts encourage us to to do violence against the other. But I think if you read like even the Old Testament, for example, there's a concept in the Old Testament called putting the ban on an enemy nation, where you just kill every man, woman, child, animal, crop, like destroy the enemy city. But to me, it also seems like the Jews in the Old Testament also have this sort of hospitality meme running in their mind, where you welcome the stranger, kill the enemy, and that's kind of the takeaway I got from the Old Testament. It welcome the stranger, kill the enemy, and I'm not exactly sure where I want to go with this. There's a couple directions.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm trying to think like.
But that seems like
it's not all. So it's not because you were talking about like you brought up an instance of you have a foreigner, like a different person coming in, and you feel like threatened, but it's more nuanced. It's like more nuanced or complicated than that, because even with like the ancient Jews, just because you were a different person doesn't mean they're automatically going to label you as an enemy or a threat. Because
you have to, because this belief in God, like this belief that God created you, and it also means He created him. Right. So there has to be this idea of this deep respect and recognition of the other, right? Just because of that, just directly following from that, this idea that God created you, so I care about you too. Like I have to give a shit about. No, I have to. It's part of my ideology here. My animal brain wants to tear your throat out. No. But I think that's how they balance it, because you have this need for self-defense, and you have this need to just maintain borders and stop crime, but you also have this this human side and this spiritual side of like this deep sense of the other. And so I think that's how that just seems to me what the balance was welcome the stranger, kill the enemy. It just seems like how they struck the balance.
Gotcha. Like the balance of like you're still like talking about the paradox of like of our human nature and our animal nature kind of being in balance.
Yeah.
I got cramp in my foot. Gosh,
oh, you good?
Oh no. You can cut this out if you want. Oh my gosh. We'll I need more calcium or something.
Do you want to walk around?
Yeah, just give it a minute. I'll be fine.
All right.
All right, we're back.
You're back.
No,
I'm back.
Cramp is good now. All right. Must be dehydrated or something.
So let me see if I could do a little metacognition here. So there is this idea that religion causes violence.
Okay.
And so the new atheist phrase, like, so Christopher Hitchens, for example, would say like it takes a religion to get an otherwise good person to do something bad. And that was kind of one of his catchphrases. And so we're kind of talking about war here, and we're kind of saying, well, look, the instinct towards war is this tribal thing, which is from our animal nature. And religion, it does raise the question of where your ideas and where your, let's say, your religious ideology and where your religious or your secular ideology, whatever your ideas are, your ideas tend to capture your ideas synthesize your experiences. And so if you let a tribal instinct fester inside of you, I think your ideas are going to reflect that. And so what does this say? It does beg the question of like, so what is religion to me? And like, how could my religion, or, well, first of all, what is it? And then how could it let something like that happen? So it seems like, for example, like, shouldn't religion stop a bad idea from taking hold? If that, like, that's one way to put it. Like, if it's such a good idea, if I believe Christianity is just the motherlode of good ideas, shouldn't that stop this negative tribal instinct from taking.
Yeah, but what? Oh, sorry. Were you so? So I think actually, in theory, yes, it should. But the thing that's interesting about humans is we have this weird ability to hold two contradictory things and believe them at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what happens when religious a lot of times when religious people may commit atrocious things. They're and it's not just religious people. I mean, it's anyone. We believe all sorts of things about the world, and I guarantee almost everyone has two contradictory beliefs that they hold to be true, and they may not even realize what it is. But like probably not just one, but probably many contradictory things. So that's really what it is. It's if we were like computers, where
well, I think
there's two conflicting pieces of code that didn't make sense. It's like, oh, we'll either do this one or this one. No, we're not computers. We're animals and people, or however you want to say it. We have organic brains, and we have this weird ability to just hold contradictory viewpoints. So
yeah, well, I think that comes from different situational wisdom from different situations. I think that's got to be where it comes from, where you might have one way of thinking and acting and talking at work, and then you have a totally different way of thinking and acting and talking with certain friends, and then a different way of thinking and talking with your family, and they don't. It's compartmentalized. I got the family bucket, and I got the friends bucket, and I got the work bucket,
right,
and I got the politics bucket, and maybe those are not synthesized well, right? But maybe it works, and that's why people can maintain the paradox. It's because like I keep these different aspects of life separate enough where they don't run into each other, and I don't have to deal with any potential conflicts.
Yeah. So I wonder what, I don't know if this is too much of a segue, but what does it look like a person who has a bunch of compartmentalized and conflicting like modes of living? Is it easy to recognize something like that, or like what is it like for a person to?
No, I think a lot of Catholics do it, for example, where you're going to be going to a young adult group, and then you're like sleeping with your significant other, right? Like that's all the time.
Yeah,
I see that. I see that a lot. And so I think it's like one way of thinking and talking with one group of people, and let's say you have certain friends and family which are more straight line religious, and then you have another group of friends and family which drink, smoke, have sex. You have that group of friends. It's just different ethical systems, and then you just put on different faces for them.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to kind of doing that. Or like a good example is like you go to college and then you're around different people, and then you go back. I can remember distinctly going back home and realizing that I had to act different, around my parents than my friends at college, and that really becomes apparent, I think, as a person enters into college or that's that. I definitely can relate to that on some level of like having like, because I'm obviously not a perfect person, so like I'm not always doing everything 100% right, but like being with a certain group of people, and it's almost like I'm a different person, or I hold different beliefs,
Well, bringing this back to violence, it's like people who go to war and then come back. It's different worlds. Or you could also look at historical examples of just atrocities or slaughters or genocide. Is that the right word? Or it's like American soldiers in Vietnam just started killing the villagers, right? Cases like that, and then they just go back home and live a normal life. It's like.
So it's like,
whoa.
In other words, they would do you have soldiers that go off to war maybe, and they commit atrocious things, but if they are at home, they would never. And they would never be like that at home.
And they go home and admire the beauty of Mozart. After going out and raping a villager, in one country, and So you are right. Like that is something quirky about us, where we have the ability to hold totally contradictory things simultaneously in our heads. Maybe not simultaneously, but at different times. We can switch back and forth between contradictory ideas.
Yeah, it's like we have these different we kind of like build a concept with the world around us, and for us to like change. I've heard it described where it's like when you have like you think things are a certain way, and then when you see something presents itself that challenges your concept of how the world is, you're either going to say that's not true, or it's going to cause anytime you have to change, it's going to cause a lot of internal conflict. So like anytime you change your world concept, it causes a lot of churn in your brain.
Yeah, when you have to resolve a conflict.
But it's like we have these different, we may have like, I'm speaking very generally, but these different concepts about maybe how a person is or what I believe to be true, like in my personal life, but you know, in my public life, I'll be a certain different way, and they do conflict, and we just never really want to. Most people, they have trouble just like they know they may be aware or not aware of these conflicts, but to try to resolve those two conflicting worldviews causes a lot of internal struggle and a lot of internal like churn. So
well, I think this goes back to the original point about how people will use religious language to justify their bad behavior. Where they're going to use religious language to talk about all their good behavior, but they're also going to use religious language to talk about their bad behavior. And I think it's that same language. They're using the same language game, but I think that's how they're trying to resolve their different their contradictions. Where I want to live two contradictory ways of life for whatever reason, but the way I think I resolved that, I'm going to trick myself into thinking I resolved it by using the same language game for both of those things. So I'm going to use my Catholic theology language to talk about how I should, how I'm doing charity work. But maybe I could also use my Catholic theology language to, rationalize holding slaves. Right? And so I think I really like I like that you brought up that we hold different contradictory ideas.
The slavery one was a good one, actually. Now that I think about it, like the founding fathers, they were like writing these documents of, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and then at the same time they have slaves. Like I know people. It's easy for people nowadays to kind of look at that hypocrisy and just think, oh, how could those people like write those words but then hold slaves? But it was, I think, in every time and every age there's some sort of major thing that's going on that's wrong, that is just accepted in society, and people don't really think twice about it. Most people, if most people had grown up, in like 1700s, and let's say they're white, I guess, and they probably would have thought slavery is okay because that's what everyone else thinks. They wouldn't have thought twice about it.
Yeah. So I kind of want to attempt a diagnosis of the problem here, where if people are holding contradictory beliefs, but they're using maybe the same Christian language game or the same Muslim language game or the same communist language game, right? So I'm going to go home and live one peaceful life, and then I'm going to go out to the bad guys. And I'm going to do all these bad things, and I'm going to hold contradictory things, but with the same language. And I think I want to try and diagnose why would an ideology let that happen, right? So why, if there is contradictions in the way people live, why should an ideology let that happen? Isn't an ideology supposed to be a coherent, unified description of things that helps keep things all together? Like, isn't it supposed to be this sort of unified framework?
So you're saying like ideology to include religion as an ideology, or just?
Well, I want to get there because religion isn't just ideas. So this is where I want to kind of diagnose the problem. The problem being, if we're trying to use these internally consistent frameworks to justify our contradictions, that shouldn't work. If Christianity is a unified, coherent, an internally coherent set of ideas, it shouldn't allow me to justify bad behavior here and good behavior here. It shouldn't do that. Ditto for communism. Like if communism is an internally coherent framework, it shouldn't let me justify contradictory things.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so,
you're kind of so the problem is why should an internally coherent ideology allow for people to do things that are against what the ideology says should be done? Or
no, because they're using the ideology flexibly.
Okay.
They're using the same language game of their ideology to justify contradictory ways of living. Mm-hmm. Let's say. Okay. I'm gonna go out, go to work and whip my slaves, and then I'll come back and listen to Beethoven and admire admire Picasso.
Yeah, but you're kind of like, I think that assumes that you're saying like, why would the ideology allow it? But really, it's the other way. Like we adopt ideology, the ideology to maybe justify. It's not like the ideology is like sitting there like controlling people. Like we adopt the ideology in a way to like kind of serve ourselves, you could say.
Yeah, we adopt the language game
in a very kind of very selfish way of like looking at it,
But this is why I kind of want to have this framework for talking about this, because at least from my Christian perspective, like my Christianity isn't just an ideology. Yeah. Right. Yes, there's a language game of theology where there's certain vocabulary about salvation and heaven and hell and Jesus and angels, and there's a whole vocabulary, and there's some stories, right, which create this sort of framework, this sort of map, right, and it paints a picture of the world. But then there's also my subjective relationship to reality, or it's like there's let's say my relationship with God, there's my interior life, there's my social relationships, right, there's my family and friends. It's just me in the world, and then I use this religious language to talk about that. Okay. But they're two separate things. Like my existence in the world and my behaviors and my identity is what it is. Yeah, it is what it is. And I have to talk about that and think about that.
Using the religious language that you have from your religion.
And I have to find a sort of internally coherent language structure to talk about that. Like to just make sense of things and keep things organized. Because life is so big and messy and complicated, there's so much going on. I have to keep it organized in order to just understand in order to have the identity in the first place. Like my identity is this coherent unity of all these disjointed aspects of my life. That's my identity.
I don't know if I would agree that it is coherent, though. Like, I think that's part of being human, is that it's not always coherent.
Well, it's mysterious.
Well, yeah, it's mysterious. We can't it's hard to like fully understand, but like, you're saying like why like this coherent combination of all these different aspects of your life, but like I don't think.
Well, it's a unity. Like I have a sense of self. Like I have an ego.
Right. Yeah, you have a sense of self, but like I don't know. This is getting pretty high level here, but like.
Well, I don't think it
is always coherent. That's where people have like internal conflict. Like if you're not having some sort of internal conflict, like if you don't have. The fact that anyone has internal conflict at any time means that there's some incoherency or something that's incoherent.
Good. Yeah. No, great. Yeah. But I think that's the problem, which is I have a sense of myself and a sense of my experiences in the world and a sense of who I am, which is not perfectly coherent. And then I have to talk about that and process that with this operating system, which I don't fully understand either. Right. And that's just, there's your tolerance stack up of errors. Yeah. Where all of a sudden there's wiggle room for contradictory things which I don't see unless it's forced upon me.
Yeah, but I mean I think that's just like the human experience right there. I mean there's like and like the fact that there's errors. I mean the fact that we make errors in interpreting or like using like if we perfectly followed our religion, we would not. If we perfectly followed our religion, we would not act the way that we do right now. Like as every person is a sinner. But like that's just like the human experience. Like we're fallen. Like kind of bringing it back to our religious worldview. Like we're fallen. We have a fallen nature. We're not there. In the Catholic Church, you're talking about like the following the religion, and then you have like you're kind of integrating that with like your own experiences. Like we have like a, maybe I didn't fully like, I'm kind of restating what you said, but maybe not very eloquently. But we have like a spiritual side. Another way to look at it is we have like the spiritual side, and we have this corporeal side, and because of the fall of man, the way this question that we're talking about, I think has been thought about for a really long time, like why there's a disunity between like the spirit and the flesh. But like we have, that's like maybe another way to think about it, just like disunity between the spirit and the flesh. And that's because the Catholic Church has attempted to explain this using the story of the fall of man, the fall of Adam in the Garden of Eden. And it points out to the fact that we are a fallen creature, and there's like this disunity. Part of our human fallen nature is a disunity between the spiritual and material aspects of ourselves, which can be thought of like the animal side and like the spiritual side is not fully in union with each other.
Well, that's holiness in the Old Testament. Like holiness, it sounds like wholeness, and that's actually not an accident. Like that's true in Hebrew, that's true in all the Romance languages and Latin, where it's holiness is wholeness. Yeah, like that's actually the play on words.
Yeah, that actually makes more sense now as I'm like, after that we just talked about what we did. Like it's like wholeness or integration of like all aspects of your life into some whole like kind of wholeness instead of everything being disjointed.
It's this consistent harmony between your spirituality and all the other aspects of your life and your animal brain. So it seems like we have a sort of we've gotten to a more nuanced place where I think if I'm listening to Christopher Hitchens say, well, it takes religion to get a good person to do something bad. I think my reaction to that now, having this conversation, is kind of twofold. First, well, we have an animal side that wants to do bad things all the time, and we're just letting that kind of take over. And second of all, ideology tends to capture our human experience imperfectly. And it also, like, the language we use has to do with, like, the language we use reflects our understanding of ourself and our understanding of our ideas. Like, I feel like I have a sense of self, but I also have some ideas floating around, which I think captures that. And then my understanding of both those is imperfect. And there's wiggle room for brokenness and hurt to fester in there and kind of manifest itself. And it's going to use the same language. Like, I'm going to talk about that brokenness and hurt, and however it comes out, whatever dysfunction comes out, I'm still going to use the same I'm going to use the same operating system to run that application.
And to kind of like bring it back to like our Catholic faith, and when I think of the saints, one of the things that you get a sense of studying the lives of the saints or people that are saintly is that they seem to have, they're not always happy people or living necessarily happy lives, but there seems to be, I feel like we have a sense that people that are moving towards this wholeness or holiness that we're describing, they have a sense of peace, because when you have peace, you can't have peace when you are constantly having internal conflict, right? So part of moving towards holiness and sainthood is, I think one of the biggest, a very noticeable effect of that is to have an increased sense of peace. And I think we notice that, I've definitely noticed that in my own life when I live in accordance, when I'm not, sinning and I'm not committing mortal sins and receiving the sacraments, there is a sense, I may not be in the happiest or best point of my life, but there's sort of a sense of peace that really draws me to that. And I think that peace is what draws a lot of people towards a life of holiness and wholeness.
And
that's what we would expect if that is what's happening.
We've been so focused on the negative side, the people doing bad things. We're so focused on the Pope that called for the Crusades that we forget about Mother Teresa. Where it's like people who are doing extraordinarily good things also capture that using their religious language. Like Mother Teresa is going to talk about her Christianity as the reason why she does all these good things. and it's interesting how people, again, use the same vocabulary to talk about why they do good things and why they do bad things. And so that to me is another reason why you can't just blame the language game people are using. You have to like look underneath and see what's the hurt and what are they missing, what are they afraid of, and how is that manifesting in their language.
And I mean, it's impossible to really know what's going under the hood of everyone else, but like the more each individual person, I think, moves towards trying to live their life in a more whole and integrated way, I think the better everyone else will be. So it kind of has ripple effects,
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of one of the problems. Like, I think it tends to be societies that break down, just kind of generally speaking, there are larger reasons you can explain why, but a lot of it I think has to do with the individual person. If everyone is not living a virtuous life or living a life the way they're supposed to be living, then everything else breaks down. So when everyone is
living in a way that doesn't scale,
right? When everyone's living in a way that is the way, that is a more whole and integrated with, like, what, I'm trying to think like how to eloquently like state this, but basically, I think internal, like, societal breakdown, it starts with the individual person. It's like each individual person not doing what they should be doing, and that ripples out. And then eventually all society is affected. Dysfunction
scales.
Yes. It's kind of like in order to fix problems around you, you have to get your own house in order, so to speak.
Yeah.
Kind of that, kind of going along. That's what I'm kind of like pointing out, like that kind of.
Yeah, idea. I think there is. I don't know how you're doing. How much time we want to spend on this? There is, because there is kind of
maybe try to wrap it up.
There is kind of an unsolved problem here, where I think we took this to a pretty deep place, and I'm glad we went there.
Yeah. I feel like I've been actually just like thinking. I didn't know where we were going to go with this conversation. I feel like we've been just kind of thinking out loud,
Yeah. No, me too. I'm glad we got there. One thing that we didn't really touch on was, well, someone listening to this might be saying, well, look, if you're going to use, look, you have your life experiences, and maybe you capture that with Christian language, or maybe you capture that with some kind of ism. You capture your experiences with some language game. But like, if your religion is supposed to be this motherlode of good ideas, shouldn't that make people less bad? Right? Shouldn't that be the case? Where shouldn't Christian people be living a better life?
Right. You would expect that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard to, like, the only way to really grapple with that is to just do statistics, like, to see how it's played out.
You could do a statistical analysis.
And actually, I did do a little bit of digging here, and this is just zooming in on war.
Okay.
And because there was the Encyclopedia of Wars, by, I wrote this down because I'm very bad at remembering things. I forgot who it was by, a couple historians. It's just the Encyclopedia of War. It's kind of a historical standard as far as I can tell. And they were looking at every documented war from 8,000 BC to 2000, 20 years ago.
Okay.
19 years ago. And there was 1,763 wars. So 1,700 wars. Wow. And then literally just looking at every war, they said that 123 of them were religious wars.
Interesting.
Which is not a big percent.
That definitely flies in the face of, like, people, it definitely flies in the face of a common meme that people have, which is that religion causes war. And, like, I feel like
it's less than 10%, I think. 1,700 to 100, less than 10%.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and over half of those religious wars are from Islam. And it's not I'll leave that there.
Yeah. I know that there have been wars between Catholics and Protestants. Or religious wars. The thing though about war that is, you can say, oh, like 123 caused by religion and 56 are caused by this, but I think the reality is that war, the reasons for people going to war is, there's usually not just one reason. I mean, there may be an express reason, but it's usually more complicated than just, oh, we're going into war because they're Yeah, as I think I'm kind of restating myself at the beginning.
They hate our guts.
But like really, it's like it's more nuanced than just this one reason. But
yeah,
as we talked about, which then goes into our whole.
I'm trying to remember the list of wars. I think he put the Crusades in there, and I think he put like the Bishops' Wars in there, and I forget the details of those.
Okay.
But I just kind of want to give this resources for people to
keep digging. That's a very interesting statistic right there.
Where even so if you look at this list of 123 wars, these are the ones where people cited religion as the reason for going to war.
Okay.
Like the primary, or just when you look at the situation as a historian, you would just see just the theme of religion, kind of running through.
Right.
Again, you can look at underlying causes and stuff, and you want to do that. That's just kind of looking at from a bird's eye view, kind of just saying, just giving it the category. There was another one I wanted to give. There was a book called The Great Big Book of Horrible Things. It was the 100 Worst Atrocities in History. And so this guy, he's actually not a historian, I don't think.
Okay.
He's just some guy who's just fascinated by body counts.
Yeah.
Where he looked at the top 100 documented killings. Like what was an event where the most people died?
Gotcha.
And he just made a list of the top 100.
Okay.
But this is actually like looked at by historians, and like it has a foreword from Steven Pinker, and it's gotten like pretty good reviews from like actual historian. Yeah. And so he like the top 10 doesn't include religious reasons. Like the top 10 is like World War II, Genghis Khan, Mao's China. I wrote a few of these down, like famines and the fall of the Ming Dynasty. Like those were some of the top ones.
Okay.
And these aren't like religious conflicts.
Right. Interesting.
And so it's just tidbits for people to go. That was by I wrote it down so I don't have to remember. Matthew White. The Great Big Book of Horrible Things. So
religion really gets a bad knock, It's like when you actually look at the numbers, it's not really the main reason people kill each other.
I wouldn't take my word for that. I would encourage people to go look it up. And actually, also, I could recommend Andrew Holt. He has a blog. He's a PhD in history. Super boring. He's not a political guy.
Yeah.
He's just some historian with a blog, and he was commenting on these things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I got some of those numbers from.
Look into that.
Yeah. So Andrew Holt. If you just Google Andrew Holt PhD, you can find his blog. And so that's where I I'm kind of checking some of these numbers from.
Okay. Cool.
So yeah, no, religion does get a bad rep, but numbers don't really.
Numbers don't lie.
Yeah, it was interesting to see.
That is interesting
to put it into perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Cool.
I don't know if there's any uncovered territory that you want to cover now, or
I don't know.
Wrap it up.
I think we'll probably wrap it up here.
Yeah,
we can. I actually wouldn't mind coming back to this. Like, I want to talk next time we do a podcast. I want to talk a little bit about. I think it'd be interesting for a podcast topic to talk about like being on a submarine with nuclear missiles and like. Yeah. I was gonna actually want to talk a little bit about like my thoughts on that.
It could, yeah, like, we could do another one on just the modern situation.
Yeah.
And talk about foreign affairs and talk about the current state of our military.
Yeah.
Like I was just Googling, this isn't classified information. Like this is stuff I found on Google.
Yeah.
But like just what our missiles can do. Yeah. Like our Tomahawk missiles.
Yeah.
That's scary. Like I just Google the range and the precision of them.
Yeah, like fly through a window. I don't actually know how precise, but like roughly.
I know roughly. Where this is on some DoD website.
Yeah.
Where first of all the range. So you park a submarine in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
And then it's like, all right, look at Chicago, pick a house, any house.
Yeah.
You can hit that house from the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
That's a Tomahawk.
Yeah.
And the Tomahawk, the way you measure missile accuracy is with like it's a radius. Mm-hmm. And it's a statistical thing where half of your hits are going to fall within the radius.
Yeah.
I forget what the name of it is.
No, I actually remember learning about that because I've been watching lately. I don't know what, but I've been on like this huge kick with military documentary type stuff, or like YouTube videos, and like one was like on the V1 rocket. So the V1 missiles were actually and they were like the first.
That was World War II, right?
World War II, Nazi Germany, V1 missiles. They used them to bomb.
The V1 and V2, right?
V1 was the first one. And the V2 was actually a lot better. it was all Germany bombing England.
Yeah.
But it was like they could fly him over from across the English Channel, and I think that circle you mentioned, like 50% radius, was like, I think for the V1 was like 500 feet or something, or like, it was like some ridiculous like number. It was like super inaccurate, but the idea is you just keep like dropping them, and like eventually you're just gonna like blow up something.
Yeah, I know the Tomahawk has a bunch of redesigns, but one of the more recent ones I remember seeing, it was 10 meters.
Mm-hmm.
That was its half radius. I don't know what to call it. Half radius. It has a name.
Yeah.
But half the shots are going to land within a 10 meter radius.
Well,
so that's literally pick a house, any
yeah.
house.
Well, you should look at the accuracy of the nuclear warheads that we can drop. I don't know what the unclassified number is, but they're very accurate. So.
Well, I feel like with nukes, you have a little leeway.
Yeah, you do.
The scariest thing about
you do
nukes,
have leeway, but it's like they're like more accurate. I feel like they're more accurate than they even need to be. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, the scariest thing to me is like just not even how accurate they are. None of the classified information. It's the scariest thing to me is just like the unclassified stuff I do know. Yeah. Which is you launch a satellite into outer space. This is a Trident missile.
Yeah.
You launch a satellite from the submarine.
Yes.
It goes into outer space. Yep. And then it's a pistol with 6 shots. Yeah. And it's each one, it shoots like 6 nukes at the target.
Yeah, well, so actually what it does is it flies on a platform, you're right. So it's like 6 of them. And it can move around. So it can like drop one, move to the next target, drop one, move to the next target, drop one.
Yeah. It's just raining nukes from outer space.
Yeah, that's exactly.
From a submarine.
Yeah. That's what people don't realize is that.
It's scary.
People think that the missile, like when people have a concept of us launching nuclear missiles, like from a submarine, it's like, all right, missile goes up. And then boom, but that's actually not. Yeah. Like you said, it's a satellite. It's a like satellite where it's like on a little platform that can move around and like drop the weapons.
It's freaking scary, and it's going fast because it's up in the stratosphere.
It's pretty high up. Yeah,
it's high up.
I don't know how high up it exactly goes, or if it's probably the exact number is classified. I'm guessing.
I would bet. I thought it was stratosphere. I don't have access to the classified information, so you can. No worries for me. But and then it's ridiculous.
It is very amazing capability. That's definitely true. And also, what's also cool about being on a nuclear missile submarine is that the amount of firepower that could potentially be held within the hull of that submarine is more, like the TNT tonnage equivalent is more than all the wars ever fought in the history of the world.
Yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah,
I know they really rock the boat when they get launched.
Yeah,
like it was funny. We're totally off topic.
Yeah,
now.
Just keep going.
I'm still recording.
Yeah, keep recording.
Like North Korea's submarine, where they're refurbing one of the older models, and they're trying to put a nuke on it. It's like the nuke is probably going to break the boat if they try to launch it. Yeah, they're launching it out of the sail. Yeah, so it's a total like Frankenstein job, but it just seems like a kamikaze thing. Yeah,
like it very well could sink the boat if they tried to launch it. Yeah, and that's true. Like the missiles are very big, so it's like Newton's third law or whatever, first law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So yeah, you're like launching this big thing up, so it's gonna push it. Yeah, gonna push it down.
Yeah, it really rocks the boat.
Yeah, I've never been on board when they've done like the mock launches, but I've heard that from what I've heard, you can actually feel it. You can like really feel it. Yeah, on the boat when it's.
I've heard the same thing. Have you ever heard the TAC Ops podcast?
No.
TACOPS. No, it's an ex-submariner just interviewing random people from the military.
Oh, okay.
And they do a good job of not talking about anything classified. Yeah. One of the guys was a missile tech.
Oh, okay.
On one of the boomers.
Oh, awesome.
And so he was saying it was like jumping onto a trampoline. You know how the trampoline is like, if you were to jump onto a trampoline, imagine the floor being weight, like you compared it to a trampoline.
Yeah, like you can see it like rippling through.
You compare the submarine to a trampoline.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, what's North Korea going to do with, they're just going to break the boat.
Yeah.
I wonder if that has any impacts for foreign affairs, how we treat there. We don't want them to launch it at us.
Right.
But realize if they do, it's a one shot.
Yeah, it's like one. Yeah, they could maybe get one off.
And you want to kill the submarine before they shoot it, but
yeah, that would be ideal. But
I wonder what that'll mean for like negotiating with them. We could still strong arm them.
Yeah, I don't really know. Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything right now.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna leave that one.
Right.
Yeah, this it's tough though. Like talking like as far as like talking about like military stuff, and let's say if I did like we do like I don't know if you're gonna make a podcast out of this or whatever, but it's like I gotta be really careful about what I say because what it's like one thing like obviously you know you don't want to say anything classified. If I were to let's just say someone was to like say something classified to someone in like passing, like okay, well they probably not gonna remember. But if you like post something like if you like post something online that's classified, like that's
no bueno.
Ooh, oh yeah, not good.
Yeah,
not good.
Well,
unless you're Hillary Clinton, but no. She actually didn't post, but she had it.
Delete the emails, right?
Yeah, that's right. She just had them saved on a private server with access to the internet, so someone could have potentially. So you know, grabbed all that stuff. Yeah, so cool.
I think we're running out of steam.
Yeah, I think we're good.
All right.
Usually, I think I'm good for like an hour and a half. Yeah, man.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
Always glad to have you.
Yeah.